All right, let's go ahead and move on for real this time
Mhm.
to our Best Picture movie series. We are in the year 1946 with The Best Years of Our Lives taking Best Picture, directed by William Wyler. I
Yeah.
assume, Brendan, you've seen this one before, correct?
I wanted to bring that up. Going into this movie, I was disappointed that we didn't get a documentary on the best years of our podcasting lives together, JD. That's
I
what I was
know.
hoping to see. But yes, technically, this was a rewatch for me. But I guess I had seen it way earlier in my life than I initially remembered. I think this may have actually been one of these movies that my parents showed me when I was quite young and first getting into movies.
Okay.
My initial thought was this may have been one of those I saw when I was in college or even late high school or something like that. But rewatching it again in preparation for this review we're about to have, uh, it's not that I forgot a lot about it, but I was getting these like whiffs of nostalgia, like I saw it in my childhood or something.
Gotcha.
So in a way, I might consider this kind of a first time watch again.
Wow. Okay.
Just given not just that experience, but also the as we'll talk about the trajectory of how this sits in our best picture movie series of the 1940s. I think that has allowed me to really see the movie in a completely new light now. And
Hmm.
I think that makes it a really interesting film to talk about, given what won Best Picture this same decade. The movie that William Wyler also directed that won Best Picture a few years
Yeah.
before this one, which I'm sure we'll talk about that comparison.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a different line of sight with this movie now, and it was a really interesting experience revisiting it.
Yeah, I had seen this before previously
Mm-hmm.
and really loved it. I will say it was interesting getting back into it because I started the film and about 5 minutes in, I guess I was having similar moments there with you in terms of memory and nostalgia
Okay.
because I recognize everything immediately and I'm of course enjoying those opening moments. So I simply wanted to pause to look back at my letterbox to see when I logged it last because I do remember watching this in the
Mm-hmm.
in session film era. I couldn't remember
Right.
when, but I wanted to look. And it turns out it was much longer than I anticipated. In my mind, it was a few years
Interesting.
ago. It
Okay.
turns out a few years ago was actually March 4th, 2018.
Well,
Quite a while
I mean,
ago, actually, 6 years ago.
you also thought Bad Boys for Life came out 2 years ago when it was actually
Exactly.
4 years
I
ago.
don't
So
know.
I guess the
Yeah,
law
time.
of time is just double what it actually was, right?
Exactly. My memory when it comes to time these days, and maybe it's just having kids and the effect that has on you, but
Just
I can't keep
blurs,
track of
right?
time. It
Yeah.
all blurs. It's like my son is going to be 9 this year. How did that happen? My youngest is a
I still
toddler all of
remember
a
when he
sudden.
was
When did
this
that
big.
happen?
I still remember when
Yeah.
Sam was this big. Like, we used to
It's
watch
crazy.
movies at your old apartment in Kentucky, and there was Sam napping in his
Yeah.
crib. I
Yeah.
remember those moments.
It's crazy. My youngest, I feel like I was rocking to sleep and feeding him bottles yesterday, and now he's literally running around the house. And we took him for an actual walk outside over the
Mhm.
weekend where he was on the sidewalk just galloping through the grass and having a grand old
Mhm.
time. I mean, he's like 15 months. Like I
Are
don't know
you
how that
saying
happened.
are you saying that these are the best years of your lives?
These are the best years of my life. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. But yeah, so I logged it in early 2018. So it had been a few years since I had seen it,
Sure.
although I absolutely remembered a lot of the film. But there were
Mhm.
moments that did feel new to me, similar to you, that I
Sure.
didn't recall quite as vividly.
Right.
With that said, the best years of our lives. Let's go ahead and jump right on in. It is directed by the great William Wyler. Did Ryan and Jay do a movie series on this? Is that why I watched it? I'm trying to remember. I
I
can't
don't
remember if
think
they
they
did
did
Wyler.
William Wyler. I know they did Billy Wilder. And
Yes. Yeah,
You
which
know,
we talked
they
about last weekend, I
Yeah,
believe.
we
Last week on
did
the show.
with the Lost Weekend. So I know they
Yeah.
did a series on Billy Wilder, and admittedly, I mean those filmmakers have kind of similar names, so maybe there could be like a
Yeah.
confusion there.
Maybe, maybe. I was just thinking because they came on in 2018, but I guess
Mhm.
now that we're talking out loud, that would have been a few months later because I think they
Yeah.
joined in the summer of 2018. So I'm not exactly
Yes.
sure why I decided to watch this film in March of 2018. For the fun of it, I guess. I don't know. Who
Hey,
knows?
sometimes you got to watch a classic movie that you haven't seen before at that time, right?
Actually, now that I think about it, I know exactly why I watched this.
Okay.
We did a top 3 list on non-professional actors. That's why I watched
Oh.
this. Yep, I was doing
Oh.
homework
Okay.
for that list. I remember now I watched a few films that week, probably 3 or 4 films that
Mm,
included some contenders for that top 3.
okay.
And famously, this film features one of the greatest non-professional performances in cinema history, and I wanted to give it a
That
watch. That was
makes
it.
a lot more sense.
Yep.
And now we
There it
get to
is.
talk about Harold Russell even in more detail. I'm looking forward to that.
Exactly. There you go. I don't recall the episode number off the cuff here. So if anyone listening, if you want to go and check that episode out,
I kind of
just
want to
search
go
for it
back.
at
I
InSessionFilm.com.
want
Yeah,
to go
maybe we can
back.
pull it up before the
Well,
conversation.
yeah, I want to go back to that because so did you have Harold Russell in your top 3? Do you
I'd have
recall?
to look it up. I honestly, I just remember now
Because if
as
you
we're talking
did,
here.
I'm curious as to what my response was since I had this very odd reaction of nostalgia watching it again. It may have actually been fresher on my mind at that time. I don't know. I'm genuinely curious how I responded to that take.
Yeah. I don't know. I'll see if I can look it up and find it as we talk here. And maybe at the end of the conversation we can pull up actually I guess I'm good at searching and talking at the same time.
You're pretty good at this.
I found the list. It it is from early 2018. So I was
That
right
would
on
make
that.
sense. That would make sense.
Top 3 performances by non-professional actors. So on my list, I did not. He was an honorable mention.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
I'm
you know,
guessing
and
we
looking at my list here, man, I don't know if I would change it. I look forward to talking about his performance in this
yeah.
film, but we have it listed here as an honorable mention because he wasn't on your list either.
Okay. Okay. I was genuinely
So
curious about that. I don't remember
maybe we
what my
can
list
reveal that
was.
at
It
the
was so
end.
much time, so much, so long ago.
Yeah, I don't want to get too distracted here. We've already gone down a rabbit hole. Maybe
It's a
we
fun
could
rabbit
circle
hole.
back to this at the end of the conversation, and I'll
Okay.
reveal those
Okay.
top 3.
Okay.
So moving away from all of that and back to this film, The Best Years of Our Lives, directed by William Wyler, and it stars Myrna Loy, Frederick March, Donna Andrews, Teresa Wright, Virginia Mayo, Kathy O'Donnell, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with The Best Years of Our Lives, it is about 3 World War II veterans, 2 of them traumatized or disabled. They return home to the American Midwest to discover that they and their families have been irreparably changed. Boy, are we going to get into that. So without further
Very
ado,
small
Brendan,
description for a 3-hour movie.
I know. What did you think about The Best Years of Our Lives?
I think what makes this movie interesting is the trajectory of this movie series. Because you look at
Mhm.
these movies that won Best Picture in the 1940s, a lot of them were, in some ways, responses to World War II, right? Whether it be pre World War II, our
Mhm.
entrance into World War II, especially with a movie like Casablanca. Then you had this weird period where movies won Best Picture because it's like they were trying to distance themselves from the
Yeah.
war.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With The Best Years of Our Lives, it's almost as if to say, we're back. Now we're back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no coincidence that William Wyler would be the one to bring us back after directing a movie like Mrs. Miniver, which was sort of the, it's almost like the unofficial prologue to this movie, even if it is a
Mhm.
very different story and from a different perspective, the British perspective more specifically. Um,
Yeah.
but this does tap into something really interesting. And I think what makes this movie work so well, and full disclosure, I don't know if I think it's the best movie that has won Best Picture in the 1940s. You have a movie like Casablanca in there that's really hard to ignore.
Mhm.
But the Best Years of Our Lives might be my favorite of the bunch.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. Okay.
you know what I think it is? I love the domesticity of it, and it's just such an empathetic movie,
Mhm.
and I love that sense of empathy that it brings for a movie that really was like most of these movies in the 1940s, very ahead of its time and what it was choosing to depict. You know, the idea of coming home from the war and how that affects your home life, the post-war world that you come back to. That is not new at this point now in 2024, right? That is a very heavily explored theme.
Yes. Yeah.
But this was very immediate in 1946. And I love that the film was willing to get approved to go as deep as it does, especially with regard to a performance like Harold Russell's, who I'm sure we'll talk about, as
Mhm.
real as that is. He is it's a legendary Oscar win. It
It
is.
is.
He won
Absolutely.
twice the same night for that one performance
Yeah.
because he was apparently given an honorary
Yeah.
award by the
They didn't think he
Academy.
was going to win.
Yeah, and of course he
Yeah.
goes on to win the award later on in the night anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, we'll talk about his performance, but yeah, it's a legendary win. But I think what makes the movie so empathetic is the sense of truth it brings on what it means to deal with the war effort after you've already committed to it and how that affects your family lives. Many of the people who made this movie, who are even in this movie, were part of the war effort in some way. Like William Wyler himself, I believe, was part of the Army Air Forces, if I'm not mistaken. Actor Frederick March was also a member of the Army, and some of the other people behind the camera, I think cinematographer Greg Toland also served in the Navy.
Mhm.
So there are aspects of this movie that have this kind of lingering truth that kind of reminded me of Italian neorealism in a weird way, at
Okay.
least
Yeah, I can see that.
like
Yeah.
in a flashier kind of way, in a more
In a
Hollywood
Hollywood
kind of
kind
way.
of way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think the essence of that approach is still kind of here, and that does make the movie as empathetic as it is, which I just really responded to. It's one of those movies that I hate to say this term because it's such a cliched film criticky kind of term to say, but it makes you sit back and think they just don't make them like they used to anymore.
Mhm.
It's one of those movies, and at nearly 3 hours, it's actually a very rewatchable film. I could sit back and watch this again tomorrow, and I would probably enjoy it. I think it is that good. It's a great movie.
Yeah, I absolutely love this film. Absolutely love it. It is, for my money, one of the best picture winners. It's right up there
Sure.
with Casablanca as far as this decade goes, especially.
Yeah.
And you're right, it brings the 40s full circle
Hmm.
as it relates to the war. It detoured the decade that is with
Hmm.
Going My Way and The Lost Weekend, as you talked about, although The Lost Weekend is somewhat applicable. But
Yeah.
with Mrs. Miniver and the way it demonstrates the importance of maintaining resolve, and Casablanca holding up a microscope to America's decision to abandon its isolation and join the war effort,
Hmm.
it just makes sense now that the war is over to give us something about life in a post war America.
Yeah.
And not just for the servicemen who have come home with trauma and disabilities, but for those around them who equally struggle to adapt. This
Yeah.
film emulates those challenges beautifully, whether it be personally, socially, economically. There's a lot of nuance there with how the film exposes the massive disconnect from those who did and did not experience the war firsthand, which is why
Hmm.
those opening scenes are subtly brilliant. Because on one hand, you can't
Yeah.
help but be moved by the families reuniting and seeing their loved ones come home from war. You could argue the film won Best Picture just for that sequence alone. But
It's a
at the
great short
same,
film. The first 30
it
minutes are a great short film.
it's so good. But at the same time, as affable as it is, there's still a recognition that nothing will be the same as it was
Hmm.
before. And it sets the table for the film to deconstruct the idea that the war is not over, because for Fred and Al and Homer, it isn't. They're
Hmm.
still very much recoiling from their experiences. And as the film unfolds, new battles arise for them. When it comes to World War II, even now, let alone in 1945 and
Yeah.
1946, we romanticize those heroes and that generation, the greatest generation they've been dubbed.
Yeah.
It's understandable. They fought and defeated an enemy hell-bent on world domination. But the truth is murky. The consequences of World War II lingered and lingered, and I love how bold it is in making those characters vulnerable and
Yeah.
flawed.
Yeah.
The greatest generation did not come home feeling like the greatest generation.
Hmm.
And that dichotomy is really interesting. The history books look at them on and hold them up to this pedestal, but individually, maybe not so much. I love that this film was willing to address that as
Yeah.
quickly as it does in 1946.
That's the
They had just
brilliance.
come home. They had
Yeah.
just come home. And yeah, the holding up of the mirror in that regard is absolutely mesmerizing in this
Oh
film.
yeah.
I really love the romance stuff as well. I want to talk about that as we
Sure.
go. I teased
Absolutely.
earlier in the show. There's one moment where I stood up and cheered. We'll get to that
Which I
here
know that moment. That
soon.
moment should not have worked, and yet it does.
I love it. But yeah, this is a lavishing film. I love it.
Oh yeah, one of the best scenes in the movie that talks about what you're talking about is the cab ride home,
Mm-hmm.
and the use of mirrors there symbolically. First off, the use of mirrors in the entire movie is quite brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be in the ladies' room between Marie and Peggy, I
Yes.
think is
Yeah.
really quite great. A great cinematic shot there.
Mm-hmm.
The way Al looks at himself in his own mirror and then looks at a photograph of himself to see how much he has actually aged, which is sort of his arc in many ways. That kind of exacerbates his alcoholism even further. Uh,
Yep.
but that first use of mirrors, that rear view mirror in the cab ride home, and all three of them together, you could tell that the thing they still only enjoy the most and what they're still used to is the camaraderie with their fellow man, their fellow war man, right? And they can't separate from that yet. So when they finally get home, each of them delays going home. They say to each other, "How about we just go get a drink right now? We can go home
Yeah.
later."
Yeah.
And while you want to see these men still hang out because you enjoy their camaraderie and they have great chemistry with each other. At the same time, there is still something kind of bittersweet and sad about that too. And I think the movie does a great job getting that balance right with what you're talking about. So that's a very daring and bold notion that there is a brokenness with these men.
Yeah.
And the film was also very daring to look at different perspectives of those returning home from war, that some people don't always see it as a good thing. Some people even acknowledge that, oh, here are these servicemen coming to take our jobs
Mm-hmm.
now. Like the
Yes.
film is willing
Yeah.
to acknowledge that too. Or maybe the possibility with someone like Fred, he is known to do one thing in the war effort. Does that limit his abilities to do other jobs? And like
Mm-hmm.
the way that the film also gets into like the social class side of things, the economic side of
Yes.
things,
Yeah.
is very bold, considering how immediate that this was following the end of World War II.
Absolutely. No, I love that the film is willing to layer its characters through the prism of
Mm-hmm.
them personally, how they feel lost, how they
Yeah.
don't recognize the world they've come home to,
Yeah.
socially, how do they fit in here?
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a few great examples where Fred, he can't find a job. He doesn't know
Yeah.
anything else other than dropping bombs through
Mm-hmm.
his bomb site. And it also has a capitalist prism
Yeah.
here, which
Yeah.
somewhat circles back to Fred, but also you think
Yeah.
of Al in this film,
Yeah.
who is a wealthy banker. I actually love how all three of them are kind of representative of the various factions of wealth in this country, because
They're
Al is
different.
the
Yeah.
wealthy
Yeah. You're right.
banker, Homer is the middle class, Fred is the lower class representative here. And I do love how the film kind of gives us insights into those characters and how they react through
Mm-hmm.
all of these various factors.
Oh yeah.
It's really something to watch here, especially when you couple it with how vulnerable they are sometimes volatile in this film, but Fred, Al, and Homer, at one point or another, they all seem completely lost
Mm-hmm.
as to this world they've come to.
Yeah.
It's like America completely changed itself over the course of the last few years, and they don't recognize any of it, which is why that cab ride scene you mentioned there a moment ago is
Mm-hmm.
really tantalizing in this film on an emotional perspective. You really do see that in the characters.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Al at one point even says verbally, "What scares me is that everyone is going to try and rehabilitate me." Like
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
very aware
He
of
knows.
his
Yeah.
problems.
Yeah.
And you see it when he struggles to connect with his wife, at least initially. He doesn't recognize his kids. He's very reliant on alcohol as a
Mm-hmm.
vice, which is why I do think the Lost Weekend still somewhat tethers itself here with
Yeah,
what we
somewhat of a
talked about last
precursor
week.
happening. Yeah, that's a
A
fair
little
point.
bit,
Yeah.
because those kinds of addictions certainly come about because of trauma and how people coped with them,
Mm-hmm.
which certainly leads to a whole slew of other problems, as we saw last week when it comes to
Yeah.
alcoholism
I
specifically. But
Yeah, I will say this film has one of my favorite drunken escapades I've ever seen in a movie. Like the first thought I had was the movie Akira Kurosawa's film with
mhm,
Takashi Shimura going on this drunken escapade and how much I love that. But here it has some similar humorous vibes that then all of a sudden crystallizes in a very bittersweet and kind of like depressing way. And I think this film has something similar there too. I love the irony that these people all come home and I think William Wyler as a filmmaker is very aware of this. I think he's trying to make the audience think about this is that just because Fred is ranked as captain, you would think he's the one coming home to the upper class, right? But it's the other
yeah,
way around. It's the
it's
exact opposite.
subversive in that regard. Yeah,
I couldn't help but think that he may have been the influence or the basis for Tom Hanks's character in Saving Private Ryan as this captain, but is oh, what does he do? He's a school teacher. It's like you wouldn't
yeah,
expect that. You might think of
yeah.
something else. And I was reminded of that, but I love the use of that irony that he comes home to an environment that you don't expect, especially as someone that
hmm
technically outranks the other two characters coming home with him.
hmm
I think that's treated really delicately, and I love the way it's handled.
Absolutely. It is fascinating, and I don't think the film delves too much into this because it's mining so many things that I love, that
Yeah,
I absolutely love. But that specific dynamic, I think, is super compelling. The idea
yeah,
that Al is simply a banker. In
yeah,
fact, he gets a promotion. He's vice president of small loans. So he has this fancy comfort job, but
yeah, yeah.
overseas in Japan, he was simply a soldier on the islands.
Yeah, but
That's all he was
interestingly,
doing.
he gets promoted as vice president, but he's only serving servicemen who are coming back home from
Yes.
the war, as if to
Veterans.
say that,
Yeah.
yeah, we're giving you a job that still forces you to not be able to escape what you had to deal with for the past
Exactly.
couple years or whatever it was.
Exactly. And I do want to talk about that further with Fred as well, because that's a big
Yeah.
component to his character. But yeah, again, it's interesting that he was a soda jerk, but
Hmm.
overseas in the army, he became this captain, was revered for his work. I want
Yeah.
to talk about the scene when we find out about one of the medals that he received.
Hmm.
And when you come home and it's a completely different world where you're not honored in the same way, it can be jarring. And we do see that with Fred, or
Hmm.
even with Homer. He was a child. He
Yeah.
was talking about his high school days, which
Yeah.
seemingly weren't that far away. And now here he is disabled on the other side
Hmm.
of World War II. So it is interesting how your roles shift in these ways that leave this incredible void in
Yeah.
all three characters. Like how that comes through, I think, is incredibly hypnotizing
they
here.
they all have their own individual stories to tell that could be their own compelling movie, and that's really why the movie is as long as it is, because you basically have three narratives that are being interwoven with each other. If anything, this is one of the earliest examples of the like the interlocking narrative, like movies like Magnolia and Nashville and Boogie Nights, like the Robert Altman thing where he brought many characters together that intermingled in like their own kind of way. This is a movie that's certainly doing that as well. But they all have their own individual stories to tell, and Harold Russell plays this really innocent figure so well. It's interesting because apparently when he was first cast, William Wyler discovered him, and I guess producer Samuel Goldman uh, was trying to send him to acting lessons, and
Yeah.
that made William Wyler really mad because he wanted his inexperience to be the thing that drives the character, and that
Mhm.
is why his performance is so effective.
Yeah, there's a tangibility to it and authenticity.
It
Yeah.
reminded me of the only person working nowadays, the only filmmaker working nowadays that would probably cast someone like a Harold Russell in their movie is someone like Chloe Zhao. Like I was actually kind of thinking
Okay.
of Brady Jandreau in The Rider.
Makes
Uh,
sense. Yeah.
yeah, because Harold Russell is not an actor. In fact, I think he's only ever been in what 5 movies, maybe if that.
Yeah.
And this being his major work, and of course we talked about it, he won 2 Oscars for this one
Crazy.
performance.
It's crazy. Yeah.
It's crazy. It is a great performance though.
He's so good.
It's his inexperience is not a hindrance. It is
Yeah.
utilized to the right effect for
Yeah.
for his insecurities, coming home as someone that was kind of a high school hero in the jock world. He was a
Yeah.
sports player. He played
Yeah.
football, I think.
Quarterback. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was very popular in that regard. So any type of distance that he feels like he forms with his family, it's really his own fault. And
Yeah.
the film is aware of that, and clearly Harold himself is aware of that, which makes it such a brave performance. It
Yeah.
really is one of the best depictions of disability that I think we've ever seen in film.
It's breathtaking. And I
Yeah.
think what's brilliant about the performance is that you do empathize with him. Of course,
Mhm.
much of the trajectory of the character is that he just wants to be treated like everybody else. He doesn't want or need your pity, and he wants to be able to do everything himself.
Yeah.
And what's great about Wyler's direction in that regard is that there are moments here, in fact, several, 3, 4, 5, 6 different moments in this film
Mhm.
where Wyler simply takes a step back, lets him on his own interact with the camera, letting him just do what he does with his hooks, whether
Mhm.
it's lighting a cigarette, drinking a glass of beer, playing the piano, shooting a gun, whatever it is. Wyler just simply steps back, captures it all in camera, and lets him demonstrate that his disability doesn't have to diminish his life.
Right.
And if everyone else would recognize that, then he would be able to probably live a more fulfilled, satisfying life. But that's not the reaction he gets from everybody. They
Right.
all want to pity him. They're heartbroken for him. And to a degree, that is the human response to have. I think that's what's interesting about the irony of who he was in high school. And there is that shot of him reflecting on his glory days. And you see in camera pictures hanging on the wall of him, with the football, and he's about to throw it, or playing basketball, where your hands are so important. Especially if you're a quarterback in football, your hands are so important
Kind of need
to that
those.
position.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there is a tragic irony there. However, he doesn't want to be defined by what was taken from him when he's still as capable now as he was before, aside from a few things here and there. Maybe we can talk about the scene at the end of the film when he's having that great conversation with Wilma. But the way he taps into
the waterworks scene for me.
yeah, it's really great. But the way Russell taps into that earnestness of I can do these things, and Wyler letting him demonstrate those things, he can do them. He can get his shirt on and off.
Yeah.
He just can't button it. So like there is this incredible duality there where you can't help but feel sorry for him, but at the same time he doesn't want or need you to feel that way. And he reverberates that with incredible conviction. It is a stunning performance. It truly is hard to
It's so
believe that
yeah.
he's a non-professional actor.
It's so layered too. Like, I think of the
Yeah.
scene at the soda shop or the drugstore that leads to this physical confrontation involving Fred.
Oh, you
This
mean the conspiracy theory guy?
the conspiracy.
It's
Yeah,
crazy that that's a thing then in
I mean,
1946.
yeah,
Like nothing's changed on that front.
it's a very one-sided scene from a thematic standpoint, but it's perfectly fine that it is. I'm glad that it's here in 1946. That's what gives it the edge. But what makes it layered for me is honestly Harold Russell's performance, because this man approaches him and says, "Can I ask you a personal question?" Which most likely is this one thing about the hooks, but it really could be anything. Uh, he goes directly to his hands. He just starts talking
Mhm.
about his hands and showcases how proud he is that he could still do these things.
Mhm.
But him
Still eat
going
the
right,
ice cream. Again,
yeah,
in camera, Wyler just lets that happen. I'll
yeah,
give you 10 seconds to eat ice cream. He
yeah,
does that often here.
yeah. But even so, like the fact that he jumps right to that is it might suggest that there is still this lingering insecurity that he has to prove something, right?
Mhm.
Even
Yeah.
from someone that might not be asking that. Like there is this almost hidden layer to it all, given the scenes that we knew
Yeah.
earlier that sort of recontextualize it. Then,
And he feels that way because no one believes him. Like they're
yeah,
constantly demonstrating this pity. He sees it. They might not voice it, but
hmm,
you can read the room.
yeah,
And he knows that people are looking at him a certain way.
yeah,
Or in the case of the man there at the counter, directly wants to ask him about it.
hmm,
And he knows that's the first thing. It's the same thing with the kids earlier in the film. They want to see the freak, as he calls it. Like he's aware of it, but I think a lot of that feeling of I need to prove something, it comes from that
yeah,
directly. If everyone just treated him as normal as everyone else, I don't think he would feel
yeah,
the need to go to that directly. That
yeah.
scene plays out very differently if his
If
family
it
and friends
look, yeah,
didn't show him pity, if the kids just looked at him as normal Uncle Homer. Like if that's all it was, then he doesn't punch the guy in the face. Well, maybe
yeah,
he does because it's a different reason why he does that. But he might not
um,
go directly to his hands immediately. The
yeah.
whole conspiracy theory aspect of it, I find hilarious because
D-
that's one of those moments where you forget why he's confronting Homer, but then you
mhm.
look at it through the lens of today, of 2024, and it's like, oh, okay, that still happens now. Humanity hasn't changed on that in that front.
Did you feel bad at all for that conspiracy theorist at the end? This is what I actually think is kind of interesting about the movie because technically I didn't, but at the same time, the film does go out of its way to suggest that Fred's punch did actually hurt him. Like he was severely injured when he landed on the
Yeah.
glass, and I think the film is at least trying to showcase that Fred did a great thing protecting his friend and standing up for what was right,
Mhm.
but maybe was too aggressive with it. There's maybe some like debate you can have there.
Yeah.
I think the film is at least aware of that. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I don't know if the film is trying to invoke any nuance there. I don't think
I
that it wants to
well,
have that conversation. I agree with you that it's one sided, and I think it's supposed to be
yeah,
because if anything, I think it's
I
mocking that kind of mentality.
yeah,
Of course, we went to war, we fought for freedom, and
yeah,
we fought against tyranny. Those men didn't lose their lives for nothing. Homer didn't lose his hands for
hmm,
nothing, which is, and
well,
especially in the world of social media, that kind of
I
thing is heightened all the
yeah,
more. So
I
I don't think the film is trying to do
well,
anything more than that.
I think the thing I'm latching on to is I feel like in most movies around this time, when you get that kind of confrontation from a one-sided argument, after the subject of that confrontation, basically the reason for that confrontation, in this case, the conspiracy theorist, when they get their comeuppance, there's usually this reaction shot of them realizing
Mhm.
something, right? We don't get
Yeah.
that here.
No.
Like we don't see his face at all after he
Mhm.
has been hit, which
Well,
kind of suggests he's probably going to the hospital. And
good
it's
for him.
like,
It's no,
but even
like,
like the
yeah.
fact that we don't get any acknowledgement from that, I think it's different. It just created this different vibe
Mm.
that made it seem like a different interpretation, or not interpretation, but a different depiction of how these confrontations happen in
Yeah.
movies, especially of this time, which I think makes it more challenging.
For sure. And rightly or wrongly, Weiler is not interested in having that conversation.
Fair.
As far as he is concerned, this is a one-sided argument.
Yeah, yeah.
This is a one-sided conversation. We're not even going to give you a moment to debate what had happened. You're a moron and you're wrong, and we're going to take it out on you if we need to. And part of the violence there is that Fred is standing up for his friend. That's certainly part of it as well. But Homer certainly escalates the situation. He gets physically involved there to begin. And I think mostly that moment there is commenting on the ridiculousness of that particular conspiracy theory. Now, context, I think, really does matter a lot when it comes to that kind of conversation, because with World War II, I think it's a little bit more black and white.
Yeah.
There was tyranny that they had to fight against, despite them taking some time to get there, as we talked about with Casablanca. But they finally got involved, and they needed to, smother those fires.
Right.
When it comes to something like Vietnam, I think there is evidence to that kind of thinking.
Sure.
And we've seen that explored a lot in film over the years as well. We've even gotten it a little bit with, the war on terror and going to Afghanistan in the early 2000s and that sort of thing.
Whether that was right or wrong or not.
There's dubious reasons for why those wars existed. World War II, despite certain facts you want to debate about the president, did they know that the Japanese were going to attack? Were they slow to react? There's some debate to be had there, genuine debate to be had. I don't think that's conspiracy theory. But getting into the war itself, it's pretty crystal clear why the United States needed to get involved.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So maybe it's in this context, because it's more black and white, I don't think there needs to be any sort of nuance here, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I don't need the nuance. No. If anything, what I was commenting on is the way the escalation resolves itself. It resolves itself in a way that I don't normally see from other movies of its kind, especially during this time. Like, I feel like it tries to crystallize itself in a different way to give a certain reaction shot from that person that was in the wrong. And we don't get that here.
Yeah.
Like, there's something incomplete about it, which I thought was kind of interesting.
And leave them.
Yeah. Like, just like that.
Yeah.
Just shock and awe is basically what it was.
Yeah. Get out of here. I don't need any.
There's like the visceral quality of that, I think, is what I was latching onto. Like, it's not just it's a violent scene. It's a very violent scene.
Fred does not pull his punches, if you will. He certainly went.
Oh, he could have killed this guy.
Yeah. Do love that about the moment. Speaking of Fred, I want to transition to him quickly here, because he's equally this tantalizing character in this film. Earlier, he talked about how he's reluctant to go home. Part of that is because he doesn't know where his wife lives. She's moved into the city, has this apartment that he's never been to. That's certainly part of it. But we do know, similar with Al, similar with Homer, there's just this uncertainty and you don't know what to expect.
Right.
Eventually, Fred does reunite with his wife, but it doesn't take long for him to realize that she really just loved him for his military money and the war medals that he received. One of the more striking scenes in this film is when Marie tells Fred, the war is over. You won't get any place till you stop thinking about it. Come on, snap out of it. Oh my God. That's an incredible line of dialogue, because PTSD would not become a medical diagnosis until 1980.
Right.
1980, decades after this film comes out, and yet it recognizes that something was wrong with a lot of the soldiers that came home.
Right.
Which included things such as nightmares, as Fred
As we
experiences
yeah,
here,
yeah.
struggles with vices, as we talked about earlier with Al, and how that comes through in the character, I think is really enthralling. There's another heartbreaking moment when Fred comes home and Marie tells him that they're going out to dinner, but she desperately wants him to wear his uniform. And when he
Mhm.
does, she says, "Now you look like yourself." And you just get this look of total despondency. It's
It's
it's incredible how his mood, his tone just completely shifts in an instant. And it's similar to what you were talking about with Al and getting this promotion, even though he's only there to work with veterans. So there's this level of I can't escape this. That's
Mhm.
all another one of those moments in the film, but with Fred this time. Even when he tries to become
Yeah.
a civilian, he's trying to transition into civility and he can't. Like Marie's holding that back as long as possible. Now you look like yourself. You look like the person I want you to be, even though he
It's
desperately wants out of that.
you know, I love talking about the character of Fred, and I love the performance from Dana Andrews,
Oh
who
my gosh. Yeah.
yeah, I think he's so great here, so tender. But I feel like in order to talk about what makes Fred so interesting, I have to talk about Virginia Mayo's performance as Marie, his wife,
Mm-hmm.
um, because she spouts out some of the most philosophical truths for this movie, and yet is somehow one of the most insufferable movie characters in movie history. And like
Yeah.
for the right like I mean that as a compliment. Like she is kind of the villain of the movie,
Uh huh.
because her materialism is sort of complicit in keeping Fred tied to his war past that he cannot
Mm-hmm.
escape from. Like you
Mm-hmm.
said, she loves seeing him in the uniform. That's the person that she married. And for context, these are two people that got married pretty
Quickly.
instantaneously. I
Yeah.
think
It's
they've only
quick.
known each other for like 2 months, I think they said. Maybe it was even less than that. As I
Mm-hmm.
think back on the film's narrative. But she is very complicit in sort of triggering Fred to keep himself tied to these detrimental things. But she always says oh, like you're only pulling $32 a week. Like we can't go out to dinner, we can't live, we can't go out dancing, we can't do
Yeah.
these things. And clearly she's tied to the life, the life outside of where they live. She likes the things, she likes the stuff.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, she's spouting lines out like you're talking about, and even is the one that spouts out the film's title. The film's title is a
Yeah.
reference to something she says. And you can't take the character away because she is sort of the
Oh
thematic
no.
crutch in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you don't like anything she does. I
Oh,
think that's
she's the
so
worst.
interesting about
Yeah.
her. She's so compelling in that regard.
No, I agree. Virginia Mayo is terrific at being the heel here
Hmm.
and completely disconnected from Fred. And
Yeah.
certainly a lot of it circles back to what you noted. We find out that they only knew each other for a month, maybe two. They get
Hmm.
married, which, as we saw in Mrs. Miniver, it
That
happened
happened.
quite
That was a
often.
thing. That was a
That
thing.
was certainly a thing. And there is a heartbreaking irony because another moment in the film when he first comes home and she's excited to see him there and they reunite, and he shows her this picture of her
Hmm.
that he had on the plane on all of his missions
Hmm.
that other members of his crew would certainly tease him about.
Yeah.
And it became this photo of hope for him, as you saw with
Hmm.
a lot of soldiers do in World War II. They would have
Yeah.
pictures
Yeah.
of their loved ones close to them to look at during the war as a coping mechanism, and Fred had her there. So in a lot of ways, she was the one who got him through the war, despite these harrowing circumstances he went
Hmm.
through, only to come home and her to not care about any of that, to have
Yeah.
no emotional nuance to her whatsoever. All she cares about is his money, his $400 a month or whatever it was,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the medals. He comes home, he looks great in the captain's uniform and has all of these ribbons, and it became a source of pride for her But for Fred, it was just a reminder of the horror that he
Yeah.
had experienced.
Yeah.
And
She was an
quickly,
enabler for sure.
she was absolutely an enabler. I mean, one of the more striking scenes of the film as well, and I believe you mentioned it earlier in this conversation, was that moment of Peggy and Marie in the ladies' room at the club, and you hear her, Marie specifically, reveal all of this to Peggy, this superficiality that defines the character, and how that sparked something in Peggy, which I absolutely want to get to here in a
Oh,
moment.
this is your Avengers moment. I know.
Like, I do love that about the character because it is in contrast to a lot of the other
Oh yeah,
characters that we
I
see
hate the
throughout the film.
character, and I love
Oh
that I
yeah.
hate the character.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. But like I said before, like she does spout out some philosophical truths that don't necessarily make the character more nuanced or layered, but it makes her more interesting, right? Like she's not just your run of the mill villain in a lot of ways, even though she kind of narratively is. But the way that Fred and his relationship unravels with her because of that is what makes it
Yeah.
interesting. And then how that basically gives Peggy this this specific goal that normally I
Mhm.
would not cheer on in a movie, right? Like what she said she's going to do, and the film acknowledges it later on, so I give the film respect for this as well. But what she says she's going to do, and I'll let you speak to this, it's not something I usually like to see in a movie because I don't
Mhm.
approve of that. And yet somehow it works simply because Marie is so insufferable that
Yeah.
you have no choice but to root
Yeah.
for Peggy in this moment.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Before I get to it real quick, because as you were talking there, you sparked something that I want to bounce off of,
Okay.
and that Marie, I just love how this film deconstructs the idea of these guys being heroes,
Yeah.
because Marie is representative of this irony. And it's not just Marie. What's great about the film is
Mm-hmm.
she's in a group with many other characters. It's
Yeah.
Al's bank manager. It's the capitalistic representation of the drugstore, and you have
Mm-hmm.
the manager of that. There's the floor manager as well.
Yeah.
These characters are symbolic of this ignorance of what these guys went through. They
Mm-hmm.
went to war, they fought for freedom, the freedom that they are thriving off of, and they have absolutely zero gratitude for it. Like zero idea that the freedoms and the joys that they experience, this financial stability or this cozy job they have, is a
Mm-hmm.
result of their sacrifices.
Yeah.
And there's a complete disconnect there. I do love how the film taps into that
All
idea,
those
which is
sides.
why
All those sides. Yeah.
all those
It
sides.
captures the entire population, which I love.
Exactly. Which is why those characters are so important to this film. You love to hate them here.
Mm-hmm.
Marie being the most prominent one for sure,
Mm-hmm.
because there is this romantic triangle that starts to form here. And you love the contrast between Peggy and Marie, all the way down to even the way they look, where Marie has this conventional beauty to her. She wears a lot of makeup, has the latest
Yeah.
hairstyles. And Peggy, although I think Teresa Wright is gorgeous
I
in her
have
own regard,
I
but
have a crush on Teresa Wright right now. I'm
oh,
not
she's
I'm
fantastic.
willing to admit it. But yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. She's more of a natural beauty by
She has a
comparison.
natural beauty.
Yeah.
She doesn't wear makeup. Her hairstyle is arguably outdated, or maybe a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more conventional. I can't really speak to the technical terms there, but the film goes out of its way to give us a contrast in
Mm-hmm.
terms of beauty between those two. There is a purposeful dichotomy there.
Yeah.
But emotionally speaking, they might as well be on different planets, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
as we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about, Marie just simply cares about the money. There's no empathy there. Peggy is this force of empathy and grace and patience, where Fred has that nightmare in those opening scenes. She's there to comfort him.
Yeah.
Whereas the line of the film that just blows you away when Marie simply says, "Snap out of it." as if, sure, my PTSD gone, just like that. Unbelievable.
So bad.
So there's this great buildup, this gradual buildup, where you see these endearing, charming, wonderful scenes between Fred and Peggy, and you're allured by their romanticism, but you understand they're blocked by the presence of Marie.
Yeah.
So it comes to a crossroads where Peggy reveals to her parents that she is indeed in love with Fred, but they recognize that, hey, he's married. This is a problem. So they ask her what she's going to do about it. And I love Wyler's direction here because there is this buildup of anticipation, this buildup to the reveal. It doesn't happen quickly. It is kind of manufactured in this wonderful.
She totally says, "Avengers assemble."
I love it. There's this buildup. There's this anticipation. You see the back of Teresa right there, and she turns around, faces the camera, and declares vibrantly with conviction, I'm going to break up that marriage. And I stood up and applauded. Yes, let's do it. I'm in. What do I need to do? I'm totally there with you. It is equivalent to Captain America picking up Thor's hammer. That's the same level of giddy that I had when she said that line. I'm going to break up that marriage. I had the same joy.
Oh my. The film rightfully acknowledges later on how wrong that technically was. They do use the term homewrecker very not broadly, very directly, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, again, like I don't like that act as depicted in movies. We sometimes see that in romantic comedies, and there's something kind of mean-spirited about that because then someone ends up getting the short end of the stick. But when that person is someone like Marie, you're kind of okay with it.
Yeah. It's the context. It's the context.
Well, the context goes even further. It extends even further when you talked about the romantic tension between Fred and Peggy. I think about their interaction that they quickly have at the drugstore, where she has this initial form of confusion when he's talking to her like a customer and then secretly says, I'm not allowed to talk to people outside of work. Like you have to be a customer. It reminded me of the connection that Glenn Powell and Adria Arjona had with the cell phone scene in Hitman. They just like instantly, they were on each other's level, like, and they played along with it. And that's the sign of good romantic chemistry. And they have it so much that when you get to that ending, man, William Wyler really plays with the suspense of waiting for that moment between the two of them. That camera lingers what feels like 20 minutes before he finally delivers what you're waiting for.
Oh my gosh, it's just the best. I want a clip of that moment. I'm going to break up that marriage with Alan Silvestri's Avengers theme. Like to where the main theme hits as soon as she says it, like as soon as Captain America says assemble, like
you would get the film nerds up in a tizzy with that one.
Like I love it. The build up to it, the music, the dialogue, it's perfect. It is a literal fist in the air moment that I do love. And you're right. It's not as if we're often rooting for infidelity. And you know, something like I joked about it with Casablanca, where we're like, we're all good with this, right? Like we're all just accepting that this is okay. And it's different like that. And that's a context where it is different because you, to one degree or another, you actually like all three of those characters. So it makes it a little
and it makes the right choice in the end, which I appreciate.
And it makes the right choice in the end. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Where this is a film that is a little bit more brazen in its approach, it's because of what Marie represents. It's the disconnect between the two of them. They even speak openly at one point, or there's dialogue anyway. I can't remember the character's name, but the date that Peggy brings to the double date they go on.
Woody, his name is.
Like speaks to how they openly hate each other. Like they just don't like each other.
But even when you first meet him, the first thing he wants to do is try and grab Peggy and give her a kiss without her permission. So even he has kind of like this scumminess to him.
They're
So
perfect for each other.
Oh,
Woody
yeah,
and
like
Mary or
oh,
Marie
yeah,
are perfect
absolutely.
for each
So
other.
so again, the movie does the right thing by making you root for infidelity because both Woody and Marie are just insufferable. So
Exactly. And look, it might be a little tropey in that
yeah,
regard. You can sense that that's where the film is building, but the execution is just incredible.
it
It's
just like,
absolutely
if
opulent.
I feel it, then it works.
Yeah,
That for a movie
you
if
absolutely
I
feel it.
feel it, yeah, and you
Absolutely. And I think,
absolutely feel it.
and to your point, I think that's where chemistry is just so important because
Mhm.
Peggy and Fred, Teresa Wright here, and Dana Andrews are striking together. There is an electricity when they're on screen.
Mhm.
And equally to Virginia Mayo's credit, as we talked about earlier, I think she equally has a great chemistry with Andrews, but on the other end of that spectrum. They do such a great
You
job
know
of
yeah.
demonstrating that there's like this loathsome feeling that
Well,
they
yeah.
have.
That is there, which is what makes the relationship so interesting because there is kind of this arc, this trajectory of sorts. Because
Yeah.
when we first see them together, we fully buy that at some point in their relationship, they did genuinely have feelings for each other, like
Yeah.
positive feelings. Of
Yeah.
course, that changes considering that they didn't know each other for very long. So it's kind of like this heartbreak kid like moment where you start to learn,
Mhm.
okay, now too little, too late. I'm starting to finally get to know who this person is way too late in the game. But it's not like it was all rough and problematic from the get go.
Yeah. And
Like when they first
yes.
interact, there is a tenderness between them.
And that's a really important distinction here because
Hmm.
that opening moment between the two of them when Fred first arrives there, it
Hmm.
is endearing. And you
Yeah,
do get a similar sense as we saw with Homer and Fred, this reuniting and how emotional
yeah,
that is.
yeah.
And I agree. There's a genuine earnestness to those sequences. It's not until she's like snap out of it
Yeah.
and she's disregarding his own turmoil and the trauma that he's experiencing.
Hmm.
Whereas with Peggy, it was the antithesis. Obviously, she like he felt her love and her graces, her graciousness, and
Yeah.
the empathy that she showed him. He really did feel that, and it makes you wonder that if Marie regurgitated those same acts, would this have played out differently? And the answer might have been yes.
Yeah.
If she was also kind and gracious and loving and, oh, it's okay, the money's not a big deal. And, I appreciate your medals and stuff, but you don't have to wear that around anymore. That's okay. Like
No.
if that's how she reacted, then his relationship with
Well,
Peggy, maybe that dissolves
I'm
earlier. Maybe it's not a problem.
yeah, I'm glad it doesn't go that way because I
Yeah,
think
I agree.
that would have made the movie a more nuanced romance. But then it would have undercut the things we talked about earlier about these different perspectives of servicemen coming home from the war.
Exactly. There's
Yeah,
there's a larger goal in mind, which
yeah,
is why Marie is depicted as perhaps as one note as she is here.
yeah.
Um,
But you need that.
and I
You
love
need
that.
that.
You
Yeah,
need that absolutely
yeah.
because the film ultimately isn't trying to give us the most nuanced of romantic triangles we've ever seen. It does
Right.
have larger goals in
If
mind. I
that
agree
was
with
its
you.
goal, then it would be a problem. If this
Yeah,
wasn't ultimately a post-war experience, but it
exactly,
is. That is its priority. So
exactly,
to
a
have
hundred
that
percent.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and
totally agree.
that's why I love the villainry of Marie
Yeah,
to
and
call it
and
that.
that's why moments like I'm going to break up that marriage, you equate it to something like the Avengers because the
It's
Avengers
cathartic.
movies,
Yeah.
as much as I love them, Endgame especially, it's a moment that wants you to feel these high highs. It's not going
Yeah.
for character beats and drama as you saw in maybe some of the other individual films or these you know, like something you would get from an auteur. Like
Mhm.
it's supposed to be fun. Like Avengers Endgame is this high, it's fun, it's all these characters coming together.
Yeah.
Let's have a great time. And that moment or that specific dynamic anyway, I think is going for something
It's
kind of
yeah.
similar.
Yeah, of course we got to give Virginia Mayo credit for basically giving us the first cinematic version of Thanos
Oh
now.
yeah. It's great.
And
She's very
apparently she had to fight for this role. If I'm not mistaken, if that's the case, I'm glad she won that argument. Then
Oh, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to break up that marriage is I don't know if there'll be another moment, like individual moment that eclipses that for me, at least with the 40s.
From
Yeah,
this
from this
era.
era. Like as we go, because
Yeah,
it's so
I
good.
think it's not just because of that moment. I think just in general, Teresa Wright might give my favorite performance in the movie, and sadly, she wasn't one of them that was nominated. It was obviously we talked about Harold Russell, who is transcendent
Mhm.
here, and then it was also Frederick March, who was nominated here. I think they were the
Yeah,
only two acting noms that this movie received. But there is something so hypnotic and captivating about Teresa Wright's presence here. And I
I agree.
sensed it as well in Mrs. Miniver. I loved her performance in that movie. I didn't necessarily love what they did with the character by the end, as we talked about. I felt like she kind of
Mhm.
turned more into an object for some overarching theme that felt kind of tagged on by the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I love this performance. There's just, it's the way she looks at not just Fred, but everyone else around her. She barely speaks at times.
Mhm.
And I feel like she says the most words in a scene when she's not even talking. She has a great hypnotic capability in that regard.
I agree. It's absolutely fantastic. She gives one of the best performances of the film for me as well.
Yeah.
Honestly, it was really hard on this rewatch to decipher if I had a favorite. I clearly had a moment for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but I loved all of these
Well,
performances so much
I mean,
that
the best thing about an ensemble film like this is you can latch on to different stories with each rewatch and kind of get a different experience every time. So in a way, it almost feels like a new movie every time you go and revisit it. So at this point now, I'm latching on to Teresa Wright and that beautiful hypnotic quality that she has.
yeah.
But I give this movie a rewatch. I might latch on to Frederick March a little bit more
Mhm.
and his own insecurities by the fact that he is a father coming home from the war. He's actually older than the other men that came home with him,
Yeah.
and he addresses that. And
Yeah.
that age is something that triggers his vice of alcoholism even more. Like I might
Mhm.
latch on to that a little bit more. Maybe if I watch this movie 10 years from now or something. Like
Sure.
the movie has an ability to give you different avenues that you can prioritize without
Mhm.
undercutting what's underneath it.
Yeah.
A great movie has that ability.
I agree. I love those characteristics about Al as well. And I think what's great about this film too is that where it might lack nuance in terms of, oh, we're really going to dig into this love triangle and give teeth to the drama.
Yeah.
It doesn't have that, but I do love that it makes up for that with other dynamics that come into play. Because,
Hmm.
for example, what I'm thinking of specifically here, we were talking about the I'm going to break up that marriage moment, which
Hmm.
is great, sensational, fist in the air. I
Hmm.
loved it. However, that is immediately followed by this moment that Peggy has with her parents,
Hmm.
where she claims, "You don't understand where I'm coming from. You guys, like, your story is so different than mine. You guys had it much easier than me." And her mother rebuttals with something like, "Oh yeah, we've had it real easy.
Hmm.
Let's forget the moments where we completely hated each other
Yeah.
and we had to fall in love with each other time and time and time again." And she goes on to articulate that, yes, the relationship has been volatile, that it has been rocky at times. Like that moment, I think is really great, especially as her mom is comforting her, empathizes, understands the emotional turmoil she might be feeling
Yeah.
and experiencing because she has been there. And that's such a great moment that kind of undermines the electricity of I'm going to break up that marriage. It does ground it a little bit. And
Hmm.
and I love that the film is able to still give it texture because not only does it ground Peggy in that moment, but it also speaks to Al and his relationship with his wife in a way that we didn't really know before. So the film kind of got
It's
to have
very
its cake and eat it
revealing.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. And Millie, played by Myrna Loy here, another great performance. We haven't really talked much about her yet.
Mhm.
Um, Arguably the strongest, emotionally strongest character in the
Yeah.
movie. The way that she keeps literal tallies on her husband and his alcoholism.
Mhm.
The way that William Wyler adds some really clever insert shots that really define these character arcs and their traits even further, of Millie keeping a literal tally on her table of each shot that her husband is taking while they're on this like this business dinner that he has to give a
Yeah.
speech for.
Yeah.
And then her reaction shots after that, like that's really clever filmmaking, very subtle but
Yeah,
really
it's
clever
great.
stuff. And that little things like that do add to the character.
Oh, I agree. I mean, the direction by Wyler and the cinematography here, I think, is actually quite formidable because,
Hmm.
I talked about earlier where Homer, like, he just lets Russell act in front of the camera
Yeah.
quietly, pragmatically, just lets him demonstrate his usefulness with these hooks. Or
Hmm.
there's something like what you're talking about there. Another shot I think of as well is with Fred at the end of the film when he's in that plane, like he's in the nose of
Yeah.
the plane, and there's no dialogue there. It's just
Hmm.
Fred sitting there, and it's as if for the first time in this entire movie, that it's 3 hours long and we're near the backstretch of it. It's the first time Fred felt as if he was home after coming
Hmm.
home,
Yeah.
sitting in the nose of that plane at that graveyard. And it just lingers there. Like you just get a shot of him in that nose. And I kind of love how it kind of closes in and then it kind of tilts up. And you
Yeah.
just kind of get that shot of Fred there reflecting and
You,
almost giving us this comfortability we never had
you,
really seen from him previously.
yeah.
Incredible moment.
Well, yeah, which is the way his character crystallizes in the work he's able to get after that. I think makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense because it keeps him tied to the past, but still gives him that ability to move on as if he's not trying to completely separate himself
Yeah.
from it. He takes what he learned from that time at the war and uses it for something new that's still somewhat related to it.
Which
Uh,
is
eh,
Al. That's
it
also Al's trajectory here too.
very
We,
true.
we didn't really get into those specifics as much, but
Hmm.
part of his speech and that drunken escapade there at that celebration or whatever
Hmm.
is him antagonistically to his bosses anyway, going, "No, I'm going to give out these loans to these veterans because I
Even if they
believe in
don't have
them."
the collateral. Yeah.
Even if they don't have the collateral, because I believe in them. So
Yeah.
it's a way for him to give back and
Hmm.
to wrestle with his past while moving forward. Like that's his version of it. And
Yeah.
as you articulated there with Fred, that becomes his version.
Otherwise, they go in this downward spiral and things get
Yeah.
worse.
And of
And
course
yeah,
for Homer, it's getting married. That's
yeah,
his way of doing that. So
yeah.
man,
Good
this movie's
movie.
awesome.
Great
I love
movie.
it. I love it so
I
much.
I think this I think it's a 5-star movie on Letterboxd for me. I think I like it that much.
Yeah, looking at my letterbox from 2018, I gave it 4.5. And I think I'm with you. I'm at 5. My only criticism, and this is really more of a nitpick than
I'm
anything
curious if
else.
it's the same thing as mine because I have one minor criticism as well.
Yeah, my only minor thing here is I do think Homer gets lost in the middle.
Oh,
There,
okay, that's not what I was gonna say.
yeah, there's a good chunk of this movie, a significant chunk, I should say, rather, where he is out of the picture, where it goes back and forth between Al and Fred, and
Hmm.
so he does disappear. So in terms of balancing, I like of the three, it's not equal measure. That
Hmm.
doesn't diminish the film though for me because I think it needed to put some more weight on the other two, given its broader post America
Yeah,
ideas it wants to
yeah.
explore here. And there's a little less with Homer, and you also you kind of tiptoe around the risk of becoming redundant in terms of
Well, that's
the
the thing.
pity
His
that
his
he's
is more.
constantly
I don't
wrestling
want to
with.
say his is obvious, but his is more direct, and
Yeah,
I think that directness allows you to take a bit of a step back, let it linger, let it pause, and
yeah,
because it is so effective in that directness, it kind of lingers like this ghost. His character kind of does, and you wait for him to come back. So it's almost like he's still present in a weird way, and I think that's also a credit to Harold Russell's performance too.
yeah. That would be my only nitpick, and that's why it's ultimately a nitpick because I
Yeah,
understand the broader goals in mind, even if for a good chunk he just
yeah.
disappears.
I
But
think my only nitpick, and I'll bring this up as a question for you. Do you think that Al even needed to have a son in this movie?
That's also interesting because he has what, 2 scenes here?
Yeah, and then he goes off to school and you never see him again.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that is a little futile, I guess. I don't know if we really needed to have that here. I guess
And
if
it's not
anything,
like,
it just,
yeah, it's not like the scenes that he has here like really offer much. I mean, he has something interesting to say when he's on screen for that one moment, but
yeah.
it doesn't really, I guess, like spearhead a certain narrative trajectory or
Yeah.
thematic trajectory, right?
Does he even show up for the wedding at the end? I'm not
I
even
didn't see
sure.
him. I didn't see him. So
Yeah.
now, thankfully, it doesn't fall into the same problem I had with a movie like, let's say, Interstellar, where I thought, okay, there's no reason to have 2 kids. This should have just been Matthew McConaughey should have been a single dad, right? Just one
Yeah,
child.
that's a
Murph. Yeah.
great point there. Yeah.
Yeah. Now this
I
movie's
do
not.
think that becomes a problem.
It's a problem in that movie. It's not quite a problem
Yeah.
here because
Yes.
because that character in Interstellar kept coming back. He was part of the movie completely. So
I kind of forgot about that because I get
yeah,
so mad about the ending of Interstellar, about how fleeting that moment is,
that you
he
forget about both
completely
Timothy
ignores
Chalamet,
his other kid.
And Casey Affleck. Like, you have 2 great actors playing his son, and it's like, yeah, you know what? I'm a dad, but I only care about my daughter. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of
I
how it
only have
comes
one
off.
kid, really. I
Yeah.
have no son. He's dead to me.
Yeah. So it's like, thankfully, the best years of our lives doesn't fall into that same problem.
Yeah. That's
Like,
that's a good
yeah,
point. I agree.
his son is so futile, as you said, it doesn't really matter. But I was sitting there thinking, like, did he need to be here, even at all?
No, I don't think so. If anything, I think it just demonstrates again the disparity or the aspect of life he's in comparatively to Fred and Homer, and that he's married, he's got 2 kids, he's got this this cozy job, he's wealthy, like he has the life. He shouldn't have any problems, right? Like, I think that's kind of the idea it's going for.
Sure,
But narratively, dramatically, there's no room for him in the end. And so we had to cut someone out, and unfortunately, that was him. It doesn't bother me, given the.
It doesn't bother me. I
overall
just sat there
idea of the
thinking,
film.
like, hey, he has another kid. I guess Teresa Wright's more important, and I understand why. But still, it's couldn't help but think about that.
The only other thing I would add to this film, and I don't really have. I didn't do as much digging into this as I would have liked to coming into this conversation. I simply ran out of time. But I think there is a conversation to be had about the camaraderie between the 3 of them, Al, Homer, and Fred here, specifically with Fred and Al.
Yeah.
And like how close they really are. Like there's a lot of excitement to be had around around like they get
It's very brotherly.
excited. It's very brotherly. They're very close. There's even that gag at the beginning of the film when they're in the cab and they have to bring Fred back into the cab because he's gonna pass out drunk there in front of the apartment. And you see Fred and Al kind of cuddling there in the back. And they kind of make a joke about it.
They say, don't they make a cute couple? I think is what they say.
something like that. But you really do get a sense of, which is ironic because they experience the war in 3 different ways. And yet they come home and there's still this shared understanding of what they just experienced and what they had to go through. And it brings them together. Like, and in a non-physical way, though, I still think of that moment of Al at the bank talking to this other veteran. But the moment he sees Homer, he immediately jumps out of that conversation to go see Homer and wants to see him. And there's like this excitement around the 3 of them that just makes them act a little differently. Even going back to what we said earlier about Fred and him standing up for Homer and this guy and he's saying all of these awful things. Like, I think part of that also comes from this electricity they get just being around each other.
Yeah.
Would Fred have done that for a veteran that he didn't know? I don't know. Maybe not. It's hard to say. But like when they're together it just, there's a camaraderie, a brotherly love that is sometimes even physical that I think is interesting. You know, it's
Yeah.
1945, so the film doesn't push those boundaries too much, but you know, it's there in a way I think is interesting.
Yeah, it definitely it suggests that there is, it kind of broadens what the term romantic could be, right? Like
Mhm.
romantic doesn't necessarily mean, romance all the time. Like two people can have a romantic relationship that doesn't necessarily need to, devolve into romance or sexual tension, right? That
Mhm.
camaraderie could be romantic in its own way. And I think that this film is doing a really interesting thing, sort of questioning what that label could be.
Mhm.
At least, like, not directly. I don't know if that was even something that was on William Wyler's
Yeah, I
mind.
don't
He
know.
just wanted to
I don't know.
showcase them as close, as brotherly as we were talking about.
Mhm.
But it's hard not to think of those things in a 2024 world, right? You,
Yeah.
you kind of jump to these other ideals that maybe could have been on the minds of certain filmmakers way back in the golden age of Hollywood.
Yeah.
And it's not there, but it's also not there.
Yeah.
That's what's kind of interesting about it.
I agree. To me, it adds to the deconstructionist ethos of this film when we're talking about the greatest generation, and this is what
Hmm.
masculinity is supposed to be. And this film comes out again in the immediacy of the war ending
Yeah,
and giving us depictions of these soldiers, these veterans who are vulnerable, they have vices,
yeah.
they're emotionally volatile, they're struggling. You know, it's not at all the convention of what masculinity has been billed to be.
Yeah, and it's not even just that they are friends. We sometimes see just that in a very high level way. Like, we believe that these three men do love each other. And
Yes.
that's like that is so crucial to this movie working. But for
Yeah.
1946 to get that direct may have been a little bit of a challenging notion,
Yeah.
which I respect. I
Yeah.
really do.
Which is why I love that this won Best Picture. I would have been
Mhm.
curious to stand on the streets to interview people in 1946 coming out
Oh
of the
yeah.
theater
Well,
to see what they would say
it not just
based
won
on
Best
that.
Picture, it was a huge box office hit at the time. It
Huge
was
hit. Huge hit.
it
Yes.
was the biggest hit in the US since Gone with the Wind, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. I believe that is correct. Like it was a huge, huge success.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
you know, and I think part of that is the whole, hey, we're closing the circle here on World War II, even though
It's
there's
like,
plenty of
"Hey, the
World War
war
II
just
films that come
ended.
out
Here's a movie
afterwards,
about
but
the world ending." Or not the world, the war
exactly.
ending. Yeah.
But like, yeah, I mean, but that's the film that struck a chord with people, that
Right.
struck a chord with voters. It's not even just that it's a World War II movie post World War II, but it's a depiction of life in America in this real raw way that
Mhm.
people wanted to see.
Yeah.
And I just find that fascinating. Like that to me is really compelling. And
Yeah, great
the
movie.
film just nails it out of the park. It's
It's
just so
it's
good.
great. Yeah, even a few things we didn't even get a chance to talk about, like the technical merits here, the cinematography here from Greg
It's good.
Toland, who
It's
was
real good.
also a veteran himself. I think that shot of Al and Fred at the bar, where it's just stagnant on them, I think that shot's even studied in some film
Mhm.
schools, and I understand why. The way it just lingers and kind of deliberately avoids the 180-degree rule. And
Mhm.
then there's the score here by Hugo Friedhofer,
Mhm.
which I think is quite beautiful.
That
But
Wyler hated. Yeah.
I know Wyler apparently hated it. It's
Yeah. I don't know why, but that's an interesting piece of trivia, though.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if every piece of IMDb trivia is true, but I assume a good chunk of it is. If that's true, that's just hilarious. Like,
That
that
is
is just
funny. Yeah.
hilarious to me.
No, yeah, I agree. No, the cinematography is great. I also love the score, and to put a bow on the whole brotherly love camaraderie thing, because the reason I wanted to bring that up, aside from the broad conversations you can have about it,
Hmm.
there's a moment in this film circling back to the romance of it,
Hmm.
where Fred and Al have a conversation. Al wants to confront him on what are your
Yeah.
motives here? Like,
Right.
are you in love with my daughter? And if so, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, Al goes out of his way. He did not have to reveal this, but he does. He tells him that I care about you as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just my daughter I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about you. Like, I
Yeah.
just found that moment to be incredible. Like, it just kind of adds to that whole
Mm-hmm.
dynamic in the film, like just how close they are,
Absolutely.
despite
Yep.
never meeting until they both flew back to Boone City together
Yeah.
after the war. It's
Mm-hmm.
just incredible. Like, I love how all of that works here. So,
That's a great movie. This is a
good movie.
great movie.
At any rate, we're going long, so we'll go ahead and end it there. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, please
Mm-hmm.
leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com, but we would really love to hear what you think about the best years of our lives. Like, this is, as far as the 40s go, which is where we're at now, this is a true toss-up between this and Casablanca. They're easily my 1 and 2 here.
Same here. I think Casablanca is the better movie, but I have more of an emotional response from the best years of our lives.
Yeah,
Like
that's fair.
if I were to list my personal favorite movies, I think I would probably have more room for the best years of our lives. I respond to the domesticity of this one a little bit more.
That's fair. And it's hard for me to really choose because I love them both. I'm gonna break up that marriage is certainly the highest high for me in the series so
Sure,
far. God, I
sure.
love that moment so much. But I can't, ignore the, you know, the incredible film that is Casablanca. So I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I go back
I
and
agree.
forth.
It's hard. It's hard.
Like, I'm probably Casablanca 1, best years of our life 2, but it's a toss up. I think it's really, really close. Like, razor's edge in terms of
Yeah,
the margin
it is
there.
close. It's very close. And looking at the films that were also nominated this same year for 1946, admittedly, I've only seen 2 films of the 5 that were nominated. I have not seen Henry V, Razor's Edge, and The Yearling, but I have seen It's a Wonderful Life, and that's a great movie as well. So there are 2 movies there competing. I mean, I don't know if the other films are as good as these 2. Most likely they might not be because that's just how the law of demand works.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's a good 1-2 punch if those were the 2 frontrunners that year. I think they're both really great.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Looking forward to Gentleman's Agreement next week
Yeah.
as we get to 1947.
That would be our first time watch for me.
That'll be a first time watch for me as well. So, really looking forward to that as we continue this series. Real quickly, we noted at the beginning of our review of the best years of our lives that we did a top 3 for performances by non-professional actors.
Yeah. Circling back to this. Good job.
So Harold Russell was an honorable mention for us both. However, top 3 for you, you had Bria Venete for the Florida Project at number 3.
Oh, okay.
Gaspard Menes, not sure if I'm saying that right, for Goodbye Children. And then Carlo Battizzi for Umberto D. That was your 3.
That's
And
a
then-
good 3.
Yeah. For me, I had Quvenzhané Wallis for Beast of the Southern Wild, Lamberto Magarani for Bicycle Thieves, and then Ayano Shiraishi for Grave of the Fireflies. Those are my 3.
Those are also great 3. And
Also great. So, like,
I like
again,
that
I don't know if
3
I
I
would-
have. I don't know if I would change. There's one individual I was thinking of. I was almost. I guess I forgot to maybe include someone like Bjork for Dancer in the Dark,
yes.
which I think if I were to upgrade my top 3 and I was to include musicians like that, which I think we did at that time,
Mhm.
I would probably make room for her in my 3. That would probably be the biggest change. Admittedly, someone like Harold Russell is so top of mind right now, given the historical significance of that performance for its time. at the very least, he would be top 5 for me. I don't know if I want to shake up my top 3 too much now that I have Bjork in the mix.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. I would really have to wrestle with this to know if I'm going to change my list at all, because I do really love those three.
Yeah.
There are certainly a few more I would throw in here. It's also interesting because I'm looking at this list, and some of our honorable mentions at the time, you could label them as non-professional actors, but by
Mhm.
today's standards, we've seen them in several more films, and I would say are
Yeah.
more on the professional side, which is kind of
They've
funny.
evolved. They've
They've
evolved.
evolved.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. This is definitely a
absolutely.
time capsule list.
Yes, it's 100% a time capsule list,
Yeah.
especially with the honorable mentions. But
Well, sadly, Bria Venete didn't fall into that category.
yes, yes,
Yeah. So I
uh,
think we've only seen her in that in the Florida Project. At least I've
yeah.
only seen her in the Florida
I
Project.
think she's done a few small things
Yeah,
since
you might be
then.
right. I haven't
Couple of
seen those
small B
though.
movie kind of stuff, but nothing
Okay.
major for sure.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay.
At any rate, Harold Russell, deserving of his Oscars. I'm very glad that he won.
Same here.
Awesome movie, deserving of Best Picture. Looking forward to next week.